Hi, everybody, and welcome. This is the SIG KCP Edge Community Meeting for November 17th, 2022. Thank you all for joining. We have quite a few items on the agenda today. We'll get started right away. So I wanted to give everybody a little update on a few things. We've got, I think, potentially three things I'd like to discuss. Then we'll switch the floor over to June Dwan, who's got some items that he'd like to discuss with the community, having to do with ways of working, logistics, as well as the creation of potentially an edge workspace. And then Paolo has some more information about multi-cluster scheduling, which is starting to develop, and would like the community's input there, and see if there's any questions and open discussions. I'll be following up afterwards with an entry into the Google group, as well as some items potentially for the Slack group for others to get involved. So if you have any input, please, if you don't share it now, you can share it there. Okay, let's get started. So thank you very much, Andy Goldstein, for all your help in the past week and a half in getting our repo up and running. We've got the CI automation now working for the ability to, when we add requests or when we add issues, they get added to our projects, and I'll share what that looks like in just a second. We've got an initial README up and in place. As a matter of fact, somebody's already inputted and had approved a spelling typo mistake that was made in that README, so that's cool. So we've already got, and we were able to use the automation to go ahead and mark it as okay to test. It looks good to me, and then eventually approve the request and watch it move through the system. So that all seems to be working well. We've got a number of different issue types that we've also put ahead. Some of them are, I've lifted some of that directly from what KCP had in there in terms of design. Kinds and areas. So I thought that was good to use there. We've also got a few new, statuses that have been created as well. Open pull requests at the moment. We'll be going over this one in particular. This has just the content of what we thought might be the beginnings of an investigation doc that could be used in the KCPIO page for investigations. We envision there be something called the Edge multi-cluster denoted here, and then clicking on that link would open the document that's surfaced here. And that's on the agenda for today to discuss that in more detail. In projects, there is a public project now listed called KCP Edge, and has a few categories. We have a category here called closed. It's not visualized here, but it's something that's it's an intermediary step between in progress, between what's done and done. So you can envision done as done at the moment. The items that are in progress here are most of what's listed in today's meeting. So that's cool that's working and moving ahead. Using a Kanban board for the most part, because that's what I feel most comfortable with, but there are other options here as well. I've copied some of KCP's items such as good first issues, incoming, those that wind up in new status, in progress, and of course the main pillars that we believe will be the possibility of these being main pillars of focus for us: Edge workspace, Edge MC placement, and Edge MC scheduler. They're just placeholders for the moment. They don't just anticipating the possibility of having work there, but we don't know for sure. We'll see how the community steers us. And that, I believe, about does it for that portion of the agenda. Any questions or comments, concerns about the repo structure and the project structure? Anything that anybody would like to see there that I haven't already included? Okay. All right. So I'll flip the order of these two because I think there's something that this might be a little quicker to discuss and open us up to the community to discuss it. Should and can we adopt a code of conduct for the calls themselves? I noticed that on many of the CNCF calls, even the Kubernetes IoT Edge Working Group, they mention the code of conduct at the beginning of each call. And I was wondering if KCP maintainers or anybody else on this call would recommend that we use that or don't use that for any reason.
I linked the code of conduct we have in the repository. Does this go beyond that?
The code of conduct, I think essentially, Stefan, what I've noticed is that they mention at the beginning of each call. And so it governs or guides the call as to what content we speak about in the community as a whole to keep it above board. And so it's just more or less saying that, this is the CNCF code of conduct and it governs how we discuss things on the call so that we don't either discriminate or exclude people that from discussing things or engage in bullying or anything like that. So I think they're kind of high level, but I've heard
Andy,
that. Yeah.
just to clarify your question, to understand your question. So we already have this, what Stefan mentioned, we have also another project. So you are asking whether you should kind of have some quick announcement of the call of conduct before in each call. Is that the question?
Yeah, I think that's where I'm going with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that anyone. Yeah, Andy, Stefan, do you do that on the KCP calls? Do you object for stating the call of conduct in the beginning of each call?
We don't do it for KCP. I'm in favor of doing it. I used to run the cluster API community calls, and like Andy was saying, at the beginning of every meeting, I mean, I could probably repeat it verbatim. I used to say every week, which was basically this meeting is governed by the CNCF Code of Conduct, which basically means be nice to everybody. And that basically covers it.
Excellent. So this call is recorded, so we can just take your phrase and use it on the beginning of each call.
Taking note. Great. Okay, are there any other comments or questions about this specific item?
Andy, on a different topic, it's not here in the agenda, but do you want also to give a quick update on the call we had yesterday with the IoT Edge working group?
Yeah, good point. I can do that, sure. Okay. All right, if there's no objection to this, then we'll make it as a summarily as a part of each and every call that we have from this point forward. Thank you very much. Ratified. All right, let's move on. KCPIO investigation. So maybe I should just, I'll just do the readout first as Paulo suggested for the IoT Edge working group, and then we can get to the interaction on the KCPIO investigation. So the IoT working group for Edge out of Kubernetes, we attended their meeting yesterday, introduced our Edge MC repository, the KCP Edge SIG, and gave them a little information about where we'd like to operate and the kinds of things that we're looking to zero in on in terms of augmentation and additions and PRs to the existing KCP upstream. There was some preliminary interest, and there also is some curiosity as to what KCP was also. We gave a brief description of what KCP was focused on and where it was operating. I think it might even serve Andy and Stefan and whomever else here is from the KCP group if you would like to schedule some time. I know Dejan is part of that. Dejan Bojnik, I believe is his name. He's part of that community, and he was the person that we used as our hook to get in there and introduce ourselves. Might be useful for KCP to do the same, KCP proper. I couldn't do it the justice it needed it, but just a suggestion. Anything you'd like to add to that, Paulo?
No, I think, yeah, my feeling is that they didn't really know the attendees about KCP, at least most of them. But in general, I think there was interested to hear new topics. Maybe KCP topic could be interesting for them. We didn't really present that topic because we wanted to focus on the edge side of things, but we felt that they could have benefited from at least having some initial background of KCP before even we talk about the KCP for Edge.
All right. Any other comments or questions on that? If not, I can, what I can do, Andy and Stefan, I can pass you Dejan's contact info if you're interested in using it in the future.
Sure.
All right. Okay, final item for me today is the KCPIO investigation document. So there is I put together a preliminary PR so that people can jump on and take a look at what we're proposing in terms of the items that are listed here. If anybody has had some time to already review this or preview it, probably not, but I intended on dropping this link in the Slack channel for KCP Dev at the conclusion of this call so that folks can get involved and edit to their heart's content. Find those little spelling mistakes and grammatical mistakes and other things that maybe are not germane to, or necessary for this document. So if you'd like to take a look at it and give us some feedback, we'd love your input.
Just
Has anybody
one quick comment.
Yeah.
It's often a little bit easier to do GitHub reviews on prose if the lines are wrapped at, I don't know, 100 characters, 120 characters, something like that. So if you wanted to, you could go back and just do the word wrapping. The editors should be able to automate that for you.
Okay. Very
I
good.
think even the Kubernetes template has a comment about doing that.
So Andy, when you say word wrap, what exactly do you mean? Like,
Or word
is this-
break, sorry. Like make sure that each line is no longer than
Oh, okay.
150 characters. Because like if you have like line 25, for example, is a paragraph, and if I wanted to comment on some part in the middle or the end, I basically have to go do the
Oh,
comment with the edit on the like the single line, and it's
see.
just like in GitHub PR reviews, it's just easier if the lines are split at character boundaries, like 100, 150, whatever.
Hey, that's
And
really
it's only
cool.
for the PR. I think that, if it may look afterwards ugly on the browser, you can merge it back afterwards. But, for the
It
PR,
won't have any effect on browser rendering. Browsers dedupe white space when rendering.
okay.
Yeah,
Great.
there's no direction in there for the browser to take any. Yeah, there's no like BR or any or break
The
point.
browser doesn't make any difference, really.
Yeah.
Okay, so excellent. Yes.
Good. Okay, yeah, I'll take that, Andy. I'll make that change. Thank you for that comment. I didn't even notice that.
Question, Andy. This is a PR now in Edge MC, right?
Did I start? This is in my
Yeah. So I
my
was,
fork of EdgeMC.
yeah, but you are doing the PR to Edge MC. Was the intent in the end to do this to KCP rather than Edge MC?
Yeah,
No,
so how do we do?
you need
should
to
we
do
s-
that. You must do KCP because the doc directory is on KCP, not on HMC. You cannot push PR.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what I thought. That was going to KCP.
Okay, so
So we probably have to close this, reopen in KCP.
reopen it in KCP. Okay.
We agreed last time that we were going to do this in the KCP.
Unless in the future, if KCP people restructure the whole repositories and put separate doc repository on each of them and pull it into KCP.io, that's a different story. But today, everything is coming from KCP docs.
Yeah.
Okay, I can do that. I'll reopen that in KCP.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other comments or questions? Okay, moving along. Get to the agenda. So next up is June. June, would you like to open up with ways of working, and then we can move on to Edge Workspace?
Okay. Thank you, Andy. Let me share my screen for a while. So I want to get started with this one first. This one is basically regarding the relationship between the two repositories, KCP and HMC. I wrote this text roughly a week ago, and I had some initial discussion with Ezra. I realized that this text might be confusing, so I come up with some picture here. Okay, so the question basically is what should be the exact content inside this repository? Should we just put some edge-specific APIs plus controllers there, as we did, as similar to this controller runtime example? Or should we also, in addition to that, also import the existing assets from KCP, including the APIs controllers, especially the API server itself? This question might look fairly simple, but we do need some confirmation from or suggestions from the community before we can really get hands-on to push code. So that's why I put this question here. I'm happy to hear from the community which way should we go.
And do you have your hands up first?
Yeah, thanks. So not option 2. We don't want people to embed all of KCP just so they can use it. There are legitimate and valid use cases for embedding portions of KCP if you want it. Like it's not easy to do today, and this is something we will be working towards. If you wanted an embeddable API server that supports workspaces or API bindings or whatever, there are valid use cases for that. But for EdgeMC, I don't think that's one of them. So yeah, like you should run KCP as a black box external system and then deploy all of the edge pieces to target that KCP instance.
Okay, so this scenario will be very similar to this controller runtime example. I just want to confirm, because this thing assumes that there is a KCP server already running there, and this adds some controllers on top of that.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, then another issue I have.
Wait, June, before we close, I have another question here. So of course now we are assuming then that any controller, like in this case agency that we add, they will require a P cluster to run, right? We are not. I wonder if there is any plan or roadmap to somehow give the ability also to start somehow within the KCP binary controller, some kind of plugin mechanism.
No plans.
Okay,
you
so
will do that.
Yeah.
You will end up with reinventing Kubernetes as a whole, right? So I don't think it's reasonable.
Okay, so even when you decouple TNC, then I assume those controllers will be still part of the KCP binary, right? Is that the current idea?
There may be a flavor of a KCP binary that incorporates the TMC bits, but honestly, we'd rather not. Like, we don't want to give special privileges to things that are outside of the core if we can avoid it. So I would anticipate that we'll have KCP core deployed, we'll have the front proxy, and then for things like TMC, once they're split out, they'll be deployed separately.
Okay, and deploy separately is always through some P cluster kind of mechanism.
Yeah.
You have your
David's got his hand up.
Yeah, just to mention that obviously there is some legacy here, or history in how TMC has started, really deeply integrated into the KCP core. Before, a number of new primitives and new features in KCP core exist. So now and we might have to identify and cope with the some places still in TMC where it's still highly coupled with the core, and for now at least requires it to be collocated, but especially in terms of being privileged in terms of permissions, but clearly we inherit from some history here, and the direction is to decouple them, TMC from the core. So I mean, starting a new project like EMC, obviously the goal would be to directly adopt the future approach.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make sense saying this like that? Maybe? I think in this regard, the state of TMC is not necessarily 100% the example to follow, because it has to cope with the history of how it started and evolved until now.
Ezra, you have your hand up?
A quick question, although it's not related to Edge at all, so it's more of a KCP. So if you do that change, what's the vision of, for example, apps, cloud service, or services like you give everyone everything, right? Both TMC and everything. So would I be able, for example, to just consume the core from the service and have my own TMC running somewhere else? You will supply both of them coupled? What's the vision here?
The idea is that everything is composable. Like you can use core, maybe there's TMC on the cluster as well, on the KCP. But if you want to bring your own, this should be possible. So as Andy said, basically, those services should not be privileged. That's a rule of thumb we follow, which means you can provide your own. Even you can run the same TMC under your own identity if you want to. Even that should work. Or a dev version plus a pod version.
And it's configured. And Stefan, is it configured? So
no. The API bindings are separated through the identity concept. Like you can provide the same CRD, the same API types as a different project, and you get your own identity, and people can bind to your variant or to the other variant.
Okay, so it's the same API. So it will go to, for example, my TMC kind of due to the identity, right?
So you will decide as a user which one you want. By default, you get the official one, the pod one, but if you want to play with a better version or another one, this should be possible, yes.
Oh, that's very nice. Okay, thank you. So that means that if I already, for example, for some project have my own central management cluster, for example, to run crossplane or whatever, some other stuff, I can actually put my TMC over there as well, right? And connect it to some central KCP somewhere else.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Just curious, is there a milestone or plan when will this happen? I mean, when will the TMC being decoupled from the core?
Soon, but probably not this calendar year, or it wouldn't be finished. But I mean, that shouldn't impact Edge.
Okay.
It's part of this enhancement document that Paul wrote. Basically, the plan for 2023. The decoupling is a big part of that. It's not detailed, like we have to make a more detailed plan, but it's certainly high priority to push that.
I see. Yeah. Thank you.
And as I mentioned, probably it would be in several steps, isolating the repos first, and then isolating also in terms of run of coupling, as we mentioned, to avoid having to build TMC enabled KCP. But obviously there would be several steps in this process. Some of them quite more impactful or harder than the first ones, obviously.
Thank you, David.
So I assume that will have implication on the way also you sort of bootstrap KCP with the TNC. So you will have to start also with having a physical cluster initially of some place where you deploy the TNC controllers. I think will be the same for ENC. So you're gonna have your KCP binary, you're gonna have your cluster, you somehow have to bootstrap these two together in a way to get that to work.
And you have your hand up?
Thanks. I mean, it's not really any different than what we do today. Like, you need a cluster to run etcd and KCP. So there's nothing stopping you from using that same cluster to run the TMC bits.
Correct.
Okay, I think the inputs are really helpful to me. I guess I got this question answered. I have another question. It's 29. This is a more simpler question, which is I'm thinking whether we need a specific workspace type for the edge use cases, because with that we can have some control on the behavior of that workspace, including the specific initializers and API bindings, etc. But because I'm still learning, I'm not sure whether I fully understand what are the benefits and possible drawbacks if we have a specific edge workspace type. So I'm happy to get some help from the community. Let me know whether this is a good or bad approach, and if it is necessary, how should I implement that?
Can answer that maybe.
You want to take this one?
Yeah, so conceptually, the type is just convenience. It's just something to get the right set of bindings into your workspace. You can do that totally manually, and during development, you will do that manually. If you run KCP start, you will get a couple of types by default.
Yep.
But consider those just as, so we call that batteries included, right? It's just a set of configuration which makes sense to play with KCP. It does not mean that those types exist in a service. They might be completely different. In KCP start, you will get a universal type which has workloads like TMC. I think we will eventually undo that when we do the decoupling.
Oh, okay. See.
So medium term, if you want to run it on a service, on a real service of KCP, you will probably have an edge specific workspace type, yes. But really see that just as convenience for users.
Okay. Okay.
And I think, June, that for now, you can do it manually. It won't impact anything else in the code, right?
Yes.
Eventually, for convenience, you can just define it.
Andy, you have your hand up.
Thanks. And just to point out, with the initializers, they generally don't or shouldn't have any more permissions than what you as a regular user have permission to do. And just highlighting what Stefan said about convenience, you make a workspace type so that you don't have to tell your users, after you've created a workspace, run these 20 commands to get it set up for use. So will it help you in the immediate time frame? Maybe. Is it necessary? No.
Okay, I see.
Like you can definitely create a shell script that populates a workspace the way that it should look, exactly the same way that a workspace type with a custom initializer would do. So the end result is identical. The way that you get to that result is shell script versus workspace type. shell script may be easier in the immediate time frame.
I think for development, simple automation will be good enough.
Okay, cool. It's very clear to me.
So I'll call on myself. So I think, Paolo, you would recognize that there's some behavior in creating a workspace that may also be prohibitive to doing it this way.
No, it's not. Okay, so initially I was thinking that we could have sort of achieved the same goal. It looks like the cluster workspace type, you can add your own, right? You can define the API bindings there. So as long as you have API export in root, it looks like you can actually pretty much put the APIs that you want, right? Is that something we can also use right now, or there is some limitation there?
Yes, you can use that. So if you know that every time an Edge workspace is created, you need 7 API bindings to be created, go ahead and create a custom type. And in the types spec, you list out the API exports that you want to bind to. And then whenever an instance is, or whenever a workspace is created of that type, the API bindings will automatically be created pointing at those exports. So that's definitely a valid use case. If you need to do more than that, if you need to pre-populate things besides API bindings, then you just have to weigh, like, do I want a shell script in the short term, or do I want to go write an initializing controller that has to go and watch for these things?
I see. Okay, so the point was more about having initializers, specific initializers for the workspace.
Yeah, so we do the API binding initialization for you. That's built into KCP.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, and yes, I have some other point about the workspace, some behavior, but that maybe something we can talk about once we talk about the scheduling. And I think it is more related to this overall problem of decoupling. It's probably a problem now. It may not be a problem in the future, but right now it is a problem. But we can talk more about that in my part.
Okay, so June, have you received enough information for this issue?
Yes, very helpful from the community. Yeah, I'm done with my question now. Back to you, Andy.
Thank you. All right, next on the agenda, we have Paolo. Paolo, please present.
Yeah, okay, so let me share. 1 sec. Okay, so the idea here was we started a document on really focusing on the scheduler for Edge multi-cluster. This is a doc I share also with the KCP dev distribution list. So I think most people should have access or may have glanced at this doc. It's still very early, but the idea was to sort of raise questions that we may want to answer, look at options, and try to focus really on in this particular case, just on the scheduler part, not necessarily tackling all the other problems that we mentioned when we talk about Edge. We have problems we talk about and we reference that document here where we talk about the difference between Edge and transparent multi-cluster. Of course, there are many areas there that we mentioned, but for now, the idea was to start at least looking at the scheduler, because this seems to be probably the simplest piece that we may start working on. There may be also some implication or some impact on the syncer, as we discussed previously, but for now, again, this is really focusing on the specific Edge. So the idea was to start this talk and hopefully get some comments, some feedback from the community. And there are some open questions here, and maybe want to quickly summarize some of the points that we have here and possibly get some answer if possible, or you can also comment offline. You don't need to necessarily give all your feedback now. So first of all, the user story are really focused on sort of the difference with what is the current scheduling in TNC. So we have some of the parts that are already in TNC. For example, the idea to write as part of the policy a namespace selector, for namespace objects. We also would like to tackle at least the ability to have some non-namespace resource, and so be able to do some selector for that. And that's probably one difference from the current placement in ENC. And also the other difference here is the third point is really about to be able to deliver a workload, as we already said, to a group of clusters, to pretty much all the cluster in a group, and or multiple groups of clusters. So that's one of the key difference when we talk about Edge versus TNC, that instead of picking one cluster from, for example, a location and delivering there, we want to deliver to all those clusters. And the last point that is more about to be able to do rollouts to a selected group of clusters, like I want just to deliver to a subset, to do kind of canary testing or stuff like that. So here we talk about the placement API. There is some other doc where we start discussing that. And so here is pretty much some difference with the current placement. So again, the idea here is to select all the matching locations rather than one location, to select all the matching sync targets within a location, and also be able to provide a selector for non-namespace resources. So it looks like pretty much the current placement API for TNC. There is some difference here. We are still debating the name of this API. Here we put edge placement, but then we realized that actually this API may be also used in general for other multi-cluster use case. So maybe it's not, maybe edge is not necessarily the best term. I know there was some comment about maybe we should call this multi-placement or something like that. So we are open to suggestions here if anybody has some thought what will be the right name. In any case, we thought we want also to have a different API group here. Unfortunately, right now, scheduling, there is just API group scheduling. Maybe we add something like edge.scheduling to distinguish this for that is really the placement for edge. But we're also debating maybe just for the kind, we want to have maybe a different name to avoid potential confusion. And we talk about this idea also about, having this workspace of type edge. So when the idea is that when a user creates a workspace, will have this API binding, the API binding for this API. So they will probably only have this edge placement API, not the other placement API. So in theory, you could also just get away just having a different API group to avoid confusion. But in any case, I'd like to hear if there is any opinion here for these names or groups.
Yeah, Stefan's got his hands up.
Just as background about scheduling, this was meant to be totally use case independent. I'm not sure we succeeded in that, but scheduling has nothing to do with workloads. And you see it in the location resource there. We also have that, I think, in the placement, right? So it points to a resource which then gives meaning to what a location and what placement actually is. Today, we only support, I think, one resource or one kind, but this is just because we didn't generalize it. So anything which is in scheduling should be use case independent. So if you have a different kind of placement, which is not around edge, like some idea about that, yeah, maybe a kind in scheduling makes sense. But if it uses the word edge, I think then we need a different API group.
Yeah. So okay. So yeah, it should be probably a different API group. You're saying not even having like edge.scheduling, but to have a completely different API group in your mind?
I think so. If it's a generic concept which has nothing to do with edge but has value in other places, then scheduling is fine. If it's about edge, then it should be in edge scheduling or something like that.
Okay. By the way, what was the reason? Because this is also a question that came up in our own internal discussion. What was the rationale to have this potential different type of location resource here? I mean, we couldn't really understand why. I mean, you have to indicate here location resource. We for now we kept this. You said that there was something.
I think the original idea was maybe you want to schedule other objects, like schedule to a broker of Kafka or something like that. I remember this discussion early on. But yeah, as I said, I'm not sure we succeeded with this generalization. It
I see.
needs real use cases, so to show, to prove it works. So
I see.
maybe try to be more specific. Maybe not a bad decision.
Right, because he has also some implication on location itself, right? That has to be general to point to different. I mean, the location CR has to basically indicate other type of resources as well. I don't think is the case today. Yeah. So yeah, the question was if you should keep on inheriting this location resource here or not. That's pretty much the discussion we are having between ourselves. For now, maybe we can keep it if we think that there may be some future use case, like you mentioned, Kafka, other things. I don't think that won't hurt, but probably we should think more about this. All right.
Recognize Ezra.
I have it's more of a question to Stefan and Andy. I think I raised that a couple of or months ago. Are there plans, because currently if we need on any level of the scheduler, even if you choose a location and then you choose, currently you randomly choose to select random if it's indeed transparent and you don't care. Why? I raised the option of putting some extension points. No.
Are we breaking up or is Ezra breaking up? All right.
Yes.
I think Ezra's breaking up. Okay.
Oh,
Ezra, you got to rewind about 1 minute of your discussion. We didn't catch it.
and
Yeah, I think we keep losing you. Try one more time. No, bad connection. Sorry, Ezra. All right, we'll see if Ezra
Okay.
rejoins us.
Maybe we'll
Please-
move on. Maybe you
please
should
resume.
try to rejoin.
Yeah, please resume.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so let's talk about some of the issues that we have here. So one challenge that we have now is currently in the current placement for TNC, we select pretty much only one location. The scheduler will select only one location. In the general case of Edge, we want to select a group of locations. So there will be a number of locations that could be potentially large. And also each location may have more than one sync target within, because you may use location as kind of grouping mechanism and say, I want to deliver this application to all these clusters in this group that is the location. And so the problem is now we have this, currently in the current placement, we have the status select the location field. So the question we're debating here is we could follow a similar approach in the status of the placement for Edge, where we could have also in the status a list of these selected locations, but we also think about scale. This could be a problem when you have a very large scale and potentially thousands of these elements. And so there was a proposal here from Mike about using something that has been used also in the context of some other KCP resource for networking. That is this idea of introducing this concept of a placement slice resource, where you could potentially have multiple of these slices to go around potential limitations and sort of partitioning this. And this resource basically will keep track of the different locations in this way. So essentially there will be some reference to this separate resource, and hopefully this will help us to scale. But this still, I think, an open discussion. I think we also Ezra has some other comment here, but right now I don't think he has trouble joining the call. Okay, so the other point here is a challenge is really about the syncing strategy, right? So we've been debating what is the best strategy when I have to deal with this 1-to-n scenario where I have to deliver the same resource to a large number of clusters potentially. We know that today in KCP, you can just label, at least the scheduler at the end will label resources with a label that has the prefix state workload KCP dev, and then there is a hash that is the sync target name and the workspace name. Pretty much the syncer, the current syncer will look and will try to find this label across resources across workspaces to sync that resource, assuming that you have the sync value here. And the problem is, if you use this approach, if you want to sync a lot of stuff, first of all, you may end up with some limitations there, right? You can't really have thousands of labels. There is some limitation also in the data label volume there. And the other problem, I think this is actually a bigger problem, is if you have multiple syncers trying to sync the same resource, they all also try to update the status, and they are actually doing this for different resources. I see that David has a comment here.
Yes, surely. It's not the case anymore now, and it should not be. In fact, the syncer, and more precisely the syncer virtual workspace, so which does the link between the syncer and KCP, it maintains a view of the status per syncer. So there are, controlled list of fields that the syncer can bring back to KCP, typically the status, but it could be also other fields in the future. And those fields are by default set as overrides on an annotation. So they are not by default, they would not be updated directly on the object. And then that's the whole point and whole goal of the upcoming coordination controllers, to be able to get the view, if we can say so, of the object related to each syncer. So with the including the overridden fields, the fields that have been overridden for each syncer, like the status, and to summarize that and to be able to set up the main status of the main object on KCP. That's typically the deployment splitter use case, which was funding KCP at start, where you mainly spread replicas across two sync targets, and then finally you get the two statuses which are maintained on the KCP object, but in annotations. I mean, just divs, in fact. And based on those two statuses, you can just calculate the main status by summing up the available replicas. So there is already this mechanism in place, but obviously the main problem here, I assume, would be, once again, like for labels, it would be the scaling, the fact that maintaining, let's say, thousands annotations to express the various fields that are overridden for every sync target would mainly bring some storage problems. On the other hand, the storage, how we store those status specific fields, those syncer specific fields, sorry, how we store that is mainly an implementation detail. For now, it's an annotation, internal annotation on the object, but it could also be worked on in the future to put that in some dedicated storage, or so mainly there would, in a quite long future, ways to bypass this scale problem, but that's the main problem for now, I think.
Yeah, this is very, very helpful, because of course for now we were assuming that I didn't know that this capability was actually available, so we are making some other assumption for scaling. Yeah, so certainly we should probably talk more about this offline, David, if you are okay with that.
Yeah.
The main question I have is, you're talking about annotation. So the annotation is on the object itself, on the resource being synced. It's not on the sync target, for example, right?
No, exactly. No, it's on the object itself. Really carries all the informations, the KCP informations, and also the informations of how the object is visible in each syncer. and the status that was reported by each syncer.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it could be, again, could be an issue, as you said, for scalability reason when you have
Yes, that's the main.
potentially thousands of syncers,
Exactly.
they're all trying to update the same object, and you have all this annotation, and there could be
Exactly.
storage
Yeah.
issues as well. So, okay. So for now, we, of course, we didn't know about that, so we
No,
yeah.
yeah. Sorry.
Yeah,
just saying that there is a mechanism in this virtual workspace that it's mainly just managing some transformation, on the fly transformation when the objects are returned by summarized, synced back by the syncer. There is one type of transformation that does this, maintaining of the status in an annotation, but obviously it could be done differently. It could be done in a dedicated object that you link to it. Mainly the mechanics would be a bit the same, but the transformation would, in order to store syncer specific views, would be different.
Mm-hmm.
So mainly, I mean, that would not be a pluggable system, but at least extracting some common parts that you could reuse in terms of code might be interesting. Maybe we can think on that.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
more
So yeah, Ben. Yeah, and definitely should talk more offline. So for now, I present what was our initial thinking, and then maybe we should explore this avenue as well. I think it's promising, and there may be actually some advantage or some disadvantage. We have to see now how this works, especially for the scale. We also mentioned here aggregation summarization is not really the focus of this talk, so it's not the scope of this talk, and this will be another design doc. And customization is as well something we're going to tackle in a different doc. For now, we were assuming that one initial thought here before actually we had this thought that we could do this also with this possible model with the syncer that David, you suggested, was to use this mailbox model idea, where essentially we have a separation from a workspace that is dealing with the workload management side of things. And then there are mailboxes essentially where we replicate resources. Each one essentially is connected to a different cluster, and objects will be somehow dropped into this mailbox, and they will be synced using the current syncing mechanism in each one of these clusters. And then aggregation of things like that, they will happen somehow independently with a separate controller where you can somehow control also how you want to aggregate and summarize the results and so on. So that was pretty much the idea. Of course, you could implement this in different ways. You can think about namespaces as mailbox, but this could be a problem if you're thinking about non-namespace resources. Or you could have a mailbox workspace, and this is pretty much the idea that we were considering here. I'm gonna skip this option one that is probably not. Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
I just saw a phrase in there about a namespace being less expensive than a workspace or something like that. Technically, yes, a namespace is a little bit cheaper than a workspace, but I wouldn't let that be messaging that percolates. Like workspaces and namespaces are meant to be equivalent in terms of cost.
Okay, no, good point. Yes, probably.
And I think, Paolo, that actually our initial goal was to try at least for mid-range scale to test the possibility of using workspace per edge location and see can that be done at all, because at least in promise, KCP supports, 10,000 or 1 million workspaces and so on. So in theory, we can do a lot with workspaces. So
Okay.
I wouldn't drop this mailbox and try that.
Yeah. Okay.
Just one rule of thumb. When you talk about workspaces backed by etcd, you will get roughly 100 to 1,000 writes per second. That's the upper bound that an etcd can provide. So if you want to store lots of live data there per location, per sync target, this will be super expensive. This will not match this write rate.
But there we are thinking of, and we need to look into how to connect it to what you're doing on the sharding part. And remember that in our case, it's not mixed. We can actually have dedicated workspaces statically sitting on specific shards, right? So we can.
Oh, you can do that. I'm just saying, one shard gives you roughly some 100 writes per second, and you have to distribute that over your workspaces. If it's not enough, you need more shards. If this is fine, it's a cost question, right? How much does it cost to operate that?
Oh, that's a good point. So we can roughly calculate how many workspaces per each CD we can kind of handle in terms of the right? Oh, that's a good point. We know from our testing that the writing was indeed a serious bottleneck on the large scale.
That's what limits Cube as well. Like they do big optimization on the kubelet to not update too often. That's how they scale.
By the way, we're gonna have this limitation independently of the fact we are using this model with a mailbox or just using sinkers, a bunch of sinkers, right? Because they're gonna do writes anyway.
Yeah, but you can aggregate before writing.
Right.
Do that.
Stefan is talking, Paul, on kind of maintaining less amount of objects. So, you know.
Yeah, okay, I see. Yeah, okay, yes, because of course in the model where we have one single sort of spec, we replicate and we just do the status update. This is, I think, what David was suggesting. Originally, we actually, yes, we have less objects to replicate, to sync. The status is gonna be still need to be synced, but the objects are certainly much less. You have a question, David? We can't hear you. You are in mute.
Sorry. Do I understand correctly that it's mainly cascading the workspaces with syncers between them until you reach the level where the number of sync targets is low enough to be able to really so that at each level the number of sync targets is low enough in order to use the standard syncing and scheduler.
Yeah,
that's one approach, right?
Okay.
I think the cost is one. We had many tests on other stuff, and I think what Stefan just mentioned, we need to kind of weight the different cost of bringing up many HCDs versus bringing up many clusters. So it's a good point.
That is also why we think it is important to have some framework to do scale testing, like simulate a bunch of syncer and clusters. That is also a direction we are exploring.
Yeah, and remember that we didn't bring it up in this call, but the whole connectivity pattern that and I see that we are out of time. The fact that we also want to maintain this model of syncer and all of that, but support also physical cluster that disconnect for a week and come back, that will have big implication on the design, right? So
yes, we're out of time.
Andy,
I'll close up the call for us. Thank you all for your participation today. There is an outstanding item on this same subject about scalability that will come up, I believe, in the next call. Our next call is on December 1st. Braulio is going to, I believe, be bringing forward some information in the Slack channel for KCP Dev, having to do with questions about, how is KCP proper testing scale for 1 million workspaces. We're also doing the team, the community for Edge MC for KCP Edge is also doing testing at scale. So maybe there's an opportunity to combine efforts, or potentially to influence each other and inform each other to bounce ideas off of each other. So look for that conversation to take place in Slack soon. Any other business that we need to discuss today from any of the members that are on the call? Okay, thank you all for your participation. I'll go ahead and post the video when it's available to the YouTube channel. We'll see you all again on December 1st. Enjoy your holiday if you're taking one.
Thank you.